NBA super teams, easily the most passionately debated and controversial subject in recent NBA history, and it's something that started arguably the most riveting era of NBA basketball. Now there are two things here, super teams and then there's the era of super teams. Contrary to popular belief, NBA super teams have been around since the early days of the NBA. The only difference between now and then is, well, player empowerment. And that's where I think a lot of NBA fans come to condemn the more modern NBA for being uncompetitive and lacking in parity. And speaking of player empowerment, that's where someone like LeBron James often gets unfairly criticized for quote-unquote starting the super team era in basketball. While it's true that LeBron helped create a super team on the Miami Heat with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, he only exercised his right to move teams as a free agent. Well, that led to other players seizing control of their future and realizing they had the power to pursue winning a championship elsewhere. Carmelo Anthony did this when he wanted out of Denver, Chris Paul moved to the Clippers, Dwight Howard moved to the Rockets joining James Harden, LeBron moved back to Cleveland in the summer of 2014, and then the time the earth literally shook when Kevin Durant announced that he was going to sign with the Golden State Warriors on the 4th of July back in 2016. And thus, the unofficial start of the super team era in the NBA. Now, whether you liked it or loved it or downright hated it, we've all got to admit, it made for some wild theater in the NBA for a few seasons. And in case you may have forgotten or simply need a reminder, I can make a very compelling argument for saying that the NBA never transformed and restructured ever before the way it did in 2016 and 2017. For those 2 years, we saw the NBA change not only from a performance standpoint and the way the game is played, but also from the standpoint of how teams started building out their rosters to contend for an NBA championship. And as incredible as it may sound, the Golden State Warriors were largely to thank for this massive transformation in the NBA. Back in the 2010-2011 season, the Orlando Magic led the NBA in both three-pointers made per game and three-point attempts per game, with 9.4 made per game and 33% of their field goal attempts coming from beyond the arc. In the 2012-2013 season, the New York Knicks led the way with a tick higher at 10.9 made per game and 35% of all field goal attempts from the three. Fast forward to the season in which the Warriors broke the record for the most wins all time. The rest of the league hovered around that same mark from the three-point line compared to teams early in the decade. The only difference was the Warriors made considerably more threes that season at over 13 a game than the next leading team that made under 11 per game. So that was the first crack in what turned into a sign of things to come. Now check this. Just 3 seasons later in the 2018-19 season, there were 19, count them, 19 teams in the NBA that made more three-pointers than the second leading three-point shooting team in the 2015-16 season. An absolutely mind-boggling number that is the perfect reflection of the new NBA and how Steph Curry's Golden State Warriors transformed the NBA in just 3 or 4 short seasons. And now let me ask you this. If you were already far and away the best three-point shooting team in basketball and were already thought of as a super team, and then you add one of the best shooters and players in the entire NBA in Kevin Durant, is it fair to say the Warriors ruined basketball? I mean, if you take it from a literal sense, there are a ton of guys that went from getting starters minutes to out of the NBA in just a couple of seasons because of their inability to shoot the three-pointer effectively. It's why there have been countless big men in the NBA that just couldn't see the floor anymore because their game could never really just adjust to the new NBA introduced by the Warriors. So let's take a closer look at the kind of impact the Warriors truly had on the NBA, starting from the middle 2010s and when they added Kevin Durant to the mix. Kawhi Leonard, Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Jimmy Butler, Paul George, Anthony Davis, Russell Westbrook, Carmelo Anthony, Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, and DeMarcus Cousins, among other all-star players in the NBA, moved teams after KD became a Warrior. Players fled to other teams to follow the new blueprint of pairing up with another all-NBA talent to take down the mighty Warriors. But despite all the moving, the Warriors only went 16-1 in their first postseason with KD on the team back in 2017. Look, whenever I think about it, and the more it becomes clear that this is one of the biggest what-ifs in NBA history. If KD doesn't link up with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson in Golden State, would the Cavaliers have won the 2017 NBA title? It at least would have been a far more competitive series. So would that have been enough for Kyrie Irving to not want out from Cleveland if he knew that he and LeBron would have a great shot at winning championships for the foreseeable future? And then to add on to that, if Kyrie stayed in Cleveland, would LeBron have ever left Cleveland a second time, and would he have ever become a Laker? How about the Houston Rockets, who finished with an incredible 65 wins in the 2017 season and looked like they had the best shot of knocking off the Warriors? That Houston team doesn't get talked about enough as an all-time great team. Here's what that team looked like that season in case you need a refresher. They shot and made the most three-pointers in the entire NBA. In fact, they made the most three-pointers as a team in a single season in NBA history with over 1,200 long balls, a record that stood for just one season before they broke their own record for threes just a season later. They led the NBA in offensive efficiency and were top 10 in defense, and get this, over 50% of the field goal attempts came from the three-point line. And they were still the most efficient long-range shooting team in the NBA. Oh, did I mention that they won 65 games, despite Chris Paul, James Harden, and Clint Capella missing a combined 42 games. With those three on the court, the Rockets were an unfathomable 50-5. 50 wins and just 5 losses, a pace that would have shattered the Warriors' 73-win season. Those Rockets teams are now seen as one of those really, really good teams that can never get over the hump. They can never get the job done. They were, however, just a game away from the NBA Finals in 2018 before losing Chris Paul to a hamstring injury in Game 6. But that series just goes to show you how talented that Rockets team was after nearly ending the Warriors' dominant run just one season after adding KD. But that Warriors team from 2016 to 2018 boasted the perfect blend of shooting, defense, athleticism, tough shot making, and size that forced teams to rethink the way they restructured their rosters. Remember how LeBron once uttered a rather famous or infamous quote, depending on how you look at it, midway through the 2016-17 season about the state of the roster? You know, we are top heavy as you know what. Do you realize why he said that? Because the Cleveland Cavaliers roster back in 2017 was, well, pretty talented and would have been a roster that would far outlast any team in the NBA and pretty much guarantee an NBA championship if the Warriors didn't exist. See, the Warriors team was so loaded from top to bottom that one of the greatest players of all time, LeBron James, didn't think that Cleveland team was good enough from top to bottom to win an NBA championship. That was the new standard set in the NBA as far as talent goes. Put it this way, if you had any plans of dethroning the Warriors, you had to literally put together a fraction of the league's all-stars to compete with the Warriors. And speaking of Warriors and the Cavs, remember all the hype surrounding the 2017 NBA Finals and how a good chunk of NBA fans thought that we were getting ready to witness maybe the greatest final series ever? Well, from a performance and production standpoint, we indeed saw some of the greatest basketball ever. The Cavs had an overall team offensive rating of 114.6, and just to frame that better, the Suns, who were first in the NBA last season in offensive rating, finished with a rating of 114.2. The Cavs and the Warriors each had a pace of 100.2. This means that they had the exact same number of possessions per 48 minutes. And bear with me while I list all these stats. I guarantee that it'll blow your mind. Kevin Durant finished with the most total points in the series with 176. The next two leading players in that category were LeBron and Kyrie, respectively with 168 and 147 points. The Cavs had an incredible 9 players with an offensive rating of at least 100. The Warriors had 11 players with at least a 100 rating. In the memorable Game 3 that went down as one of the greatest final games of all time, LeBron and Kyrie, after scoring the most points by a pair of teammates in NBA Finals history just a year earlier, scored 39 and 38 points respectively, and still couldn't win the game. All of this proves just how otherworldly the Golden State team was with Kevin Durant, particularly in their first season and first finals together. LeBron became the first player in NBA Finals history to average a triple-double and lead all players in every major statistical category. And the Cavs only won one game in that series. If that Golden State Warriors team made that Cavs team led by LeBron and Kyrie look like just some average squad, then just think to yourself how incredibly unfair playing this team was for any other team in the NBA. Remember, the Warriors and the Cavs were head and shoulders above all the other 28 teams in the NBA, and yet the Cavs couldn't see the Warriors despite having the most electrifying duo in the NBA with LeBron and Kyrie. It feels good to say that the majority of us got to witness an especially unique time in NBA history and arguably the greatest team of all time in Golden State with all their stars in the heart of their prime. But for at least a good 2 or 3 years, there was absolutely no competition in the NBA and no team that had a shot at beating the Warriors. Well, outside of the 2017-18 Houston Rockets that were this close to rewriting NBA history themselves back in 2018. what can I say? There's pure dominance, and then there's the Golden State Warriors from the mid to late 2010s. Will we ever see a collection of talent as skilled and as efficient from the three-point range as those Warriors ever again?